really glad that you're here with us this evening. Thank you so much to the Pottsgrove School District. This is our third program in a series this year. So this is our final one for this school year. We are recording this program, and I know that at least one person submitted an advanced question, but please feel free to drop any questions that come up as we're going through the presentation and each of us are sharing with you. Any questions that you have, drop those into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll take a look and try to respond as soon as we can. We are recording this, but we cannot see your questions on the recording. We can't see who's participating in this, as this is a webinar format, so you are anonymous in the recording. So thank you again for being here. And the follow-up, oh, that's the wrong follow-up. I'm so sorry, I didn't change this. My colleague Bob Lamb is on with us, and he'll put into the chat a link for the follow-up page, which is actually conversation.zone/K-5, K-5, I think it's K-5 programs. I can't remember. Well, you'll
K-5
see.
parents.
K-5 parents. Thank you, Bob. Okay, there we go. There it is, K-5 parents. You'll see a survey pop up at the end of this that will ask you some questions about if this program was helpful to you or what sort of topics you'd like to hear about in the future. Please take a moment to complete that. It would really help us a lot. So thank you for that in advance. I want to let you know about one program that we have coming up that might be of interest. This is sponsored by Montgomery County Drug and Alcohol. This is talking about underage drinking. It is still the number one substance that our young people are using. So we really hope that you'll check this out on May 19th. It will be a virtual program. So, you're welcome to join us online. And the link for registering there is convo.zone/Montco3. But basically, I would say just visit our calendar. The calendar is the best place to find everything that we have coming up that might be of interest to you. I always like to remind folks that we have support group meetings for parents who have been impacted by addiction. Parents specifically, these parent partnership meetings that happen throughout the region. Here's a calendar on this part of our website that has links to meetings taking place virtually and in person. All the green buttons are virtual meetings and the purple buttons are in person. No, I got that wrong. No, that's right. Okay, yes, purple buttons are in person. So that's really important for us to connect with one another to feel supported. So you're going to hear from a couple of other folks. I'm going to start us off with a little bit of information, but you're going to also hear from, as I said, my colleague, Bob Lamb. He is a person in recovery. He also happens to be our Director of Operations and Programs. Also with us, I'm very excited that Steve, I hope I pronounced your name right. Is it Seiler?
Seiler, you got it. Thank you.
Yay. Okay. He is the principal at West Pottsgrove Elementary School. So thank you so much, Steve, for being with us. Really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so just tell you a little bit about how I got into this. This was not my originally chosen profession, but I'm very grateful to be working in this field now. But these are my kids and my then husband, and we are a family who did a lot of fun things together. This was after my son was in a band concert. He was 14 years old here. He played the drums in the percussion ensemble. So of course, why not for Baskin-Robbins after, as you do. And the reason this photo is really pertinent to what we're going to talk about tonight is the first time my son used substances of any kind was a year before this photo was taken when he was 13. He smoked some cannabis, some marijuana. And I didn't find that out until much, much later. Here he is just a couple of years ago with his now fiance. He has 12 years of recovery from substance use disorder. The fact that he smoked some weed when he was 12 does not necessarily mean he was on a path to becoming addicted to substances, but in his case, that's exactly what happened. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how we can prevent some of these things from happening. But I want to just say that what I wish I knew then that I know now is quite a lot. And if I knew more, maybe things would have been different. Maybe they wouldn't have. I'll never know. But I wish I had known about substance use and the impact, the risk factors, the protective factors. So I'll be getting into some of that. But the importance of you, if you're a parent, being here with us is huge. It's just huge. Obviously, you have excellent teachers and support at your school district, but parents are 1,000 school teachers. And we are, even though sometimes our kids don't act like they're listening, they're watching and they're listening and they're definitely paying attention. So when we're informed, their chances are so much better just because we have a greater understanding of what some of the challenges are that kids might encounter. So the reason that kids are such an important, or looking at young people is so important, is that all of us, our brains develop basically in the same way. They start developing from the back of our brain, and then toward the front is the last to finally become fully developed. So starting with physical coordination, we have that very early in life, learning those fine motor skills, feeding ourselves, walking and talking and so forth. Emotion comes along very early in life, obviously, as well. Motivation is a very important part of young development, adolescent development, because we need motivation to learn things, to learn a new language. We're much better at that when we're young people. And same goes with skills like music and sports and things like that. The very last part of the brain to fully develop is the prefrontal cortex, which is where executive function lives. That's where we make decisions about thinking about the outcome, thinking this through. Is this really a good idea or a bad idea? And what we like to say is that the accelerator part of the brain, the gas pedal is working really well. That's the motivation. That's the willingness to try things. That can be a really good thing, but the brakes are not working so well. That's the prefrontal cortex. And that is the part that is not fully developed until we're roughly 25 years of age. So early substance use is really important. It's like thinking of the brain as wet cement. It's very impressionable. As things start to happen to us, that we form these connections in our brain, like we get this dopamine hit and we remember it and we want to do it again. So my son's starting to smoke something like cannabis when he was 13 years old. His brain was wet cement. It was really primed to feel good about that feeling and want to feel it again. And he definitely did feel that and wanted to receive that feeling again. And when we talk to our children, though, I like to caution everyone to not tell their kids, your brain's not fully developed. Who wants to hear that when they're a kid, right? But maybe to use some positive language, like this is a great time for you to build great brain chemistry. This is a really important time to teach your brain what's good for you and what's not so good. And we're going to talk more in a little bit about some of those really healthy things that we can instill in our children. So again, why this is so important. If we begin using a substance before we're 18 years old, we have a 1 in 4 chance of becoming addicted or having a problem with substance use. If we wait until we're over the age of 21, that risk factor is reduced to 1 in 25. So you can see that this really does make such a difference. Delaying the onset of use is just pivotal in our young people's potential for having a problem with substances. And beyond that, what makes one person more vulnerable than another to substance use disorders or addiction? There are basically 3 legs to this. One would be genetics. So genetics might mean, what does the family tree look like? It could be it not necessarily alcoholism or drug addiction, could be gambling addiction or other kinds of process or behavioral addictions, addictive personalities, people like to say. But that's a pretty big contributor to our risk factor for having a substance use disorder. Another piece of this is the psychosocial emotional piece. So if there's a mental health challenge, ADHD, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, trauma can play into this as well. And the National Institute on Drug Abuse estimates that roughly 6 in 10 people who misuse substances also have a mental health disorder. And I can tell you across the board, every clinician that we work with says it's definitely higher than this in their experience. That's anecdotal, but it's pretty universally believed that this is a really large contributing factor as well. And finally, the environment is a really huge piece of it. So what is the access to substances, whether it's the neighborhood, the school, the family, the home? Are there other people in the home using substances, misusing them? An older sibling, perhaps, or a friend down the street who has an older sibling. The environment plays a big piece in this. Just access is important to know about. So what exacerbates all of these risk factors, again, is that age of onset of use. The earlier we start, the more chance we have of having some issues. And we know kids are curious. They've got that motivation thing going on. They're really interested in this. So whether they are trying alcohol because it's offered to them by a parent, or if they're seeking it out secretly themselves. We can't tell from this study, but we know that 37% of kids have tried alcohol by the time they're 8 years old, and 66% by the time they are 12. That's quite a lot. And we also know that, as I think I said earlier, it is still the number one most used substance. Cannabis is creeping up, and is actually not getting terribly worse, but not getting better. Alcohol use is getting better. We are seeing less alcohol use, but we are not seeing a decrease in cannabis use. We're really looking forward to getting the results of the Pennsylvania Youth Survey, which students in grades 8, 10, and 12 have been taking every other year. Maybe it's sixth grade too, actually. Yeah, 6, 8, 10, and 12. And they do this survey every other year, and it tells us about trends. So that's a really important thing to focus on. So why is it that parents are so important? Well, this is a meta-analysis of a number of different studies that looked at what influences a child's decision to drink or to not drink. And as you can see, every study that they compared points to parents as being this huge influence. So it's really, really important that you're learning about this. And again, kudos to you. So if we are this important messenger, we need to think about what we might be communicating to our kids, totally unintentionally, but it's just a good idea to be mindful about this. So if you're over 21 and you don't have a problem with alcohol and your life is completely manageable and you're able to drink in moderation, absolutely no question that it's okay for you to drink alcohol. But what is the language you're using when you're pouring a glass of wine, when you're getting a beer out of the fridge? If we're talking about what a bad day we had, and I need this to calm down, our kids hear that, so just a cautionary note about that. And also when we have a family gathering or friends over, when the adults walk in the door, is the first thing we say, what are you drinking? So again, our kids might hear that and see how important that is to the adults, and maybe that feels important to them too. And we know that parents often feel it's a protection to have their kids drink at home. And I've heard parents say, well, I'd rather they do it here. We'll take their keys. We'll keep an eye on things. We'll make sure the other parents know that we're going to get them some beer. And they think it's a good idea to do this at home. It would be safer than on the street. And I can see some of the logic in that. But the reality is what our kids are hearing is, it's okay with my parents if I drink alcohol. And what kid really wants to only consume alcohol with their parents or around their parents. So they take away the message that this is acceptable to them. I'm not going to get in trouble if I do this. They have that selective listening so that they hear it's okay, not necessarily all the caveats that you might place with it. So permissiveness is not protective, unfortunately. So really good idea. And by the way, it's illegal, right? It is illegal to serve a minor, and we don't want to get in trouble. And there's a reason behind the law. We don't want to break any other laws either. So again, let's just try to keep the kids as safe as we can until they have that frontal lobe fully developed. I apologize for the noise in the background if you're hearing that. So again, we have examples here on social media of grownups posting things that definitely validate, glorify, humorize all the different, memes about drinking. And it's just really sad to me that kids are seeing this and again, feeling very validated in their use, or feeling like this is something I want to do. It's funny. My parents are okay with it. Every kid wants to be like a grown up. So just another caution about putting things out there publicly that are glorifying or glamorizing drinking. So we love to do this exercise with fifth graders, and we haven't had a chance to do it since COVID just because of the inability to be with you in person. But we usually in advance of these programs will ask a fifth grade class, the teacher will do this, they'll pass out index cards and ask their students to write down any question, fifth grade students, any question they have about drugs or alcohol. They don't put their name on it, so it's completely anonymous. And when they do this, they turn it in, the teacher kind of types them up and sends them to us. And we've compiled a whole lot of those. And we actually have it on that follow-up page, that K-5 parents follow-up page. And you can see the whole list of questions that we have that are really representative of what we heard from kids over the years. I have just a couple of them that I'll share with you now. I find these so interesting, and these are taken verbatim from those index cards. So, what are the main reasons people do alcohol or drugs? They're curious about that. We'd love to think that our kids aren't thinking about this, but perhaps they are. Another question, do you have to be 21 to drink alcohol? How would we answer that if our child asked this question and wonder why it is 21? What's that about? So another one is, I think this is so interesting. Are medicines that doctors give considered drugs? Can you get addicted to doctor's medicine? And if you think about it, the word drug is kind of confusing. It's, heroin's a drug. Advil's considered a drug. It's an over-the-counter drug, but it's a drug. And so it's very confusing. And it's interesting that this is not the only time this question's been asked, where children are not sure if they can trust a pharmacist, or, what is it, a drugstore? That's a little confusing to kids. Another one said, some kids drink cough medicine to get high. Is that bad? Wow. I would love for more kids to be asking this question. Cough medicine, if it has dextromethorphan, can be kind of a dissociative, and some kids have discovered this and they'll drink it pretty rapidly. Things like Robitussin, Delsum, and also Coricidin, cough and cold. Those medications they're over the counter, but you have to go to the counter to get them. So they're not as readily available on the shelf, but we know that they're in many, many medicine cabinets. So it's very important to be cautious about where you're storing those kinds of medications. And then, is there a cure for alcohol? I have a family member who drinks alcohol but can't stop. We hear this a lot too from kids. I don't like how my grandpa acts when he drinks beer. It's kind of heartbreaking in some cases, because that they're seeing more than we want to think they're seeing. And then finally, I think this is a really important one too. My friends use drugs and they always tell me to try with them. I'm afraid, but I want them to be my friends. It's not even peer pressure, guys. It's peer presence. It's just being with your friends who are drinking or trying something. It just feels like you want to be a part of that. We all can remember wanting to fit in. So I think these are really great examples. We could talk a lot about role playing and preparing our kids to refuse to try something. If they're not comfortable role playing that with you, you can suggest that they find their best friend that they really trust and play it out with them. Like, so what would we do if we were with somebody and they offered us a vape pen? Like, you want to try my vape pen? What would we say? Like, think that through, talk it through. So protective factors, we talked a lot about risk factors, right? Age of onset of use, genetics, emotional, psychosocial, all those, environment, all those things. But what are the protective factors? A lot of it is like just feeling like you're comfortable talking with a family member. I think probably one of the most important ones, I won't read all of these to you, but this is really important. Having at least one consistent and supportive adult in your life, that is important for all of us. These are all really important to think about, and this is being recorded so you can see this again. Also, I'll make sure that the slide deck is there for you so that you can see these. But when I think about this child and what we're trying to do tonight, we're not talking to kids this evening, we're talking to the adults. So we are the scaffolding around the child, right? We are helping this child hopefully to be equipped with as many tools as possible. And who is it that is helping this child along? It's their teachers, their mentors and coaches, the family, faith communities, the law enforcement folks, school for sure, support staff. And along with that comes some prevention providers, healthcare providers. You have a student assistance program in your school district, behavioral health providers like therapists, and then, of course, just the support of the neighborhood and community. So once we have all that scaffolding and all of that support coming from all over every direction, then hopefully our young person, when they are 18, roughly around that age, and are ready to emerge as an adult into the world, they've got equipped with as many tools as we can give them. So when we talk with kids, especially when they're young, obviously that conversation is going to be very different than it would be for a teenager or a young adult. So you saw some of the questions even that fifth graders have. Those can be challenging to talk about. So we want to think about when we have these conversations. And let's say, for example, your fourth or fifth grader came home from school, you gave them a hug and they smelled a little funky. There was something going on. And maybe it was, something that they were smoking or tried or were around it. So if you want to ask that question, I want to talk about communication skills here, like how to have that conversation, right? So the first thing before you do anything is to decide, am I ready to have this conversation? Am I upset? Am I calm? Am I going to be interrupted a lot? Am I feeling ready? And, so picking the right moment when there won't be a lot of interruptions and knowing that I'm not going to get really upset in the moment. So this is probably what I looked like when I was having conversations when I first discovered my son's drug use. I was freaking out and it was not productive. I think I did most of the talking. I was kind of lecturing, and I'm sure he was just thinking, I wish she would stop talking so I could go and get high. It was sort of like Charlie Brown's mother talking, wah, 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 wasn't really getting through. But really what I wish I had known then that I know now is this acronym WAIT, which stands for, why am I talking? Why am I talking? Maybe I'll ask a question, but then I need to sit and listen. So being ready to listen and saying, okay, I'm here to ask some questions. Please help me to understand why you tried that vape pen. And then as you're listening, really think about your body language. If they tell you, well, so-and-so down the street said, it really tasted good or whatever, or it felt good or something like that. If we do that look that mom had on her face, that's going to shut down that conversation right away, isn't it? Or if we say, well, I'm going to call Joey's mom and tell him that he let you try a vape pen, and that's going to shut that down right away. And maybe they're not going to be so forthcoming the next time. If your child gave you a truthful answer, let's celebrate that and say, I'm so glad you told me about that just happened. Let's talk some more. Help me to understand why you wanted to try it. How did you feel about it after you tried it, and that sort of thing. And then, make sure that you follow through by talking with the other parent and saying, like, just want to make sure that you're aware, this is what happened, here's what we discussed. Let's get on the same page, at least when we're in front of our child, be on the same page about how to proceed, what some possible consequences might be if this behavior continues, and then really following through with that. So I love this sort of a sentence that a friend gave me years ago, who's a school counselor she works with elementary age children. She said, if they don't have emotional vocabulary, they will use behavioral vocabulary. And that might be acting out. That might be trying a substance to feel differently. It might even be self-harm or something like that. But we have this jumble of words here, but you'll see when you go again on that page of our website, there's a handout that has a whole list of emotional vocabulary words. And I think it's so interesting to just look at some of these words. Maybe, somebody told me once, I stick this on my fridge and we just like pick out a day and say, or every day we'll pick out a word and say, what does it feel like to be powerless? What does it feel like to be exhausted? What does it feel like to be peaceful? So just to help our kids to have language for this. Bob and I were just at a program last evening where a lecturer who works with anxious and stressed out kids talked about this, that kids are able to name negative emotions much more abundantly than they can positive emotions. Thought that was so interesting. So again, trying to help them to expand their emotional vocabulary can be really helpful, and to encourage those conversations too. So I love the idea of teachable moments, so when we have a family gathering and there's alcohol or there's whatever substance might be passed around, but if there's alcohol use, for example, and let's say Uncle Paul was pretty tight. He was drinking a lot that night and maybe knocked over a table or something. Our kids notice these things. They're aware of it. So maybe when you get home that evening, it might be a good opportunity to say, did you notice anything about how Uncle Paul was acting tonight? Did it bother you? And just sort of talk about it. And what's really key about this is to not use shaming language about Uncle Paul or whoever this might be, because we want our kids to feel comfortable talking about what they see, what they've experienced themselves. So to not say, I'm frustrated with Uncle Paul, even if you are quietly behind the scenes frustrated, to express love and support and to help explain why it is that some people can drink a glass of wine and not have a problem, and others can't stop. And I like to, for a young person especially, most kids understand peanut allergies because there are a lot of warnings about someone in the classroom might have a peanut allergy. So everyone has to be careful about not bringing those kinds of products into the room, into the classroom. And so it can be explained to a child. It's almost like Uncle Paul has an allergy to alcohol because when he drinks a beer, his brain says, more, more, more. I want more. So he has a reaction that not everybody has. And he's your Uncle Paul. So that means it's in our family. So we need to be thoughtful about that and be really careful about things like alcohol and being offered this when we're too young. And I think it's so important to talk about snowplow parenting. I think we all know what a helicopter parent is, who hovers and is overprotective and overly involved in everything, decision making for their children and all of that. The snowplow parent is smoothing out any rough spots. So if they are in a little bit of trouble or or they didn't turn in their paper on time, or they don't want to go to school, something like that, we want to kind of ease that way. We don't want to see our kids in any pain, right? They're going to be upset if they get a bad grade because they didn't start their paper yet. So maybe we'll help them write the paper. That's a little bit of snowplow parenting, right? We don't want to see them in pain. We don't want to see them hurt. So we do everything we can to remove those obstacles or those painful experiences. And the problem with that is we're taking away an opportunity for them to learn and to grow, because the reality is they are going to have painful experiences in life. That is life. And the sooner they are held accountable and learn to do things for themselves, age appropriately, obviously, but really finding those opportunities to learn from our mistakes helps every one of us. And I love what Ken Ginsberg is, a terrific pediatrician out of CHOP who has published a few books about resiliency. And I love this quote from him. I like to think of myself as a lighthouse parent, reliably there, totally trustworthy, making sure he doesn't crash against the rocks, but committed to letting him learn to ride the waves. I love the concept of a lighthouse parent who's not freaked out running around trying to save and rescue, but to be a steady guide for our child. So some other protective factors, just spending time together with family, definitely getting together, turning off the cell phone, putting it away during meals. Mindfulness can be a really terrific way to start early to build those really good connections in our brains. So if I had a stressful day, I'm not going to use something that's going to just erase that like a drug might, like alcohol might, but maybe I'll take a quiet walk. Maybe I'll sit and meditate. Maybe I'll listen to some soothing music or meditate. There's so many apps out there for meditation now. We can teach these skills to our children when they're really young, and it can be very helpful to grow that as they grow and develop. Getting outside, huge protective factor. Being active, exercise, all that, being around all those good positive ions outside. But there's a terrific book called Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv that talks about all the value in being outside. It helps with stress. It helps with cognition. It helps with so many things. So just a few tips for you. That is all that I have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Bob, I was hoping that you could jump in now and introduce yourself to everybody.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm glad you're all with us tonight. Like Tim said, my name is Bob. I work with Be a Part of the Conversation. And I'm also a person in long-term recovery from a substance use disorder. What that means for me is I haven't used any drugs or alcohol since July of 2012. And, it's always interesting to think about, talking about substance use and having ended up in a field where we get to educate the community about it, and looking back at what my first couple exposures to substances looked like, and thinking what what could have gone differently that would have allowed me, to not go down that path, or, things that, could have changed my trajectory. But, my life is my life. And, now I get to use it as a skill, as a tool belt, as like a tool set, to help other families who may be going through crisis or may have questions or concerns. And, it's allowed me to open up my life in a lot of different ways. So I'm going to give you a little bit about my history with substances. I'm going to actually talk a little bit about what my life was like before I even tried a substance. And then, what ultimately led me to need and seek recovery, and what recovery supports I've been able to use through the years that have helped me maintain that sobriety and, that continual growth. So I grew up in Delaware County. I was the oldest of four. We were an Irish Catholic family, so we didn't really talk about problems as they came up. My family's gotten a lot more open just based off of, the life changes of today's world. But like when I was a kid, it wasn't really, I didn't have that emotional vocabulary that Kim really touched on. And that was not of like a something that my family really strove on. It's later in life I find out, both of my grandfathers had issues with substances, primarily alcohol. And, it was just something that was like never talked about, never addressed. So, the way my parents were doing the best that they could, and, were able to provide, a really, supportive environment in a lot of ways. But, also there was just some things that, I don't know, I look at it could have been, that could have been different. And, that doesn't mean they don't love me. That doesn't mean, they're the reason that I have developed a substance use disorder. But it's just, the circumstances I had and the parenting styles that were there. I didn't have the capability to express my feelings, express, my anxieties. I was a smart kid. I was always super awkward. It was pretty weird. But, all of those things compounded, like I still had like a good network of friends. I was able to be a smart kid, and like, that identity of like, as long as my grades were good, things were going to be okay at home. Like, if I came home with an A, like that's all, that was my perception of what my parents needed to see, as a kid, is like, as long as my grades are good, as long as, I'm doing okay academically, as long as I'm not participating in like sports or extracurricular activities, as much as I begrudgingly like didn't want to do some of them. I had to do like speech club in like 7th and 8th grade, and that was the last thing I wanted to do. But it was like, it was that external, like I needed to put on this external perception that like everything was good, that Bob was good, that Bob was okay. But I had like, a lot of insecurities, and, I feel like I missed the day where they like said, like, I don't know if it was like drugs are bad or like, don't do drugs, but like, because the first time I had that opportunity where like my friends were like, hey, we have alcohol, do you want to drink it? It was, yeah, sure. I don't know if that was just like people pleasing, or, I just didn't have the vocabulary to say no at that point in time, or what it really was. But like, there was never a time when a substance was presented to me from age, 12 to 24, when I finally entered recovery, that I had a no. And I think a lot of that had to do with like, my perception of like what alcohol did for my friends and family. Like, alcohol was very heavily present at like every holiday, and every social gathering my parents went to. They were very, they were responsible with it. Like there was no drinking and driving and things like that, but like it was there a lot. My underage cousins were always allowed to drink at the holiday parties and stuff like that. So like I just had this perception that like alcohol wasn't, they're all doing it and they all seem to have fine. So as long as I can keep up these external pressures, these external like appearances, that like, I could use substances like I saw everybody else in my life doing. So first time I drank, like, it was cousins sneaking me like Smirnoff Ice so it looked like, soda. So my parents wouldn't notice, or like, it was couple drinks, got a little buzz, nothing really happened. The first time I like really got drunk, friends and I got a bottle of tequila that two of us split, and it turned into a miserable night. I threw up everywhere. And, but like, it didn't deter me. That like the suffering, like I had fun. I was able to like loosen up and be myself. I was able to, or like be myself as much as I could be as like a 14-year-old, completely hammered, throwing up all over the place. So, and it wasn't like, that time didn't lead me like that, like that societal narrative that like once I drank or once I like use drugs, like I'm going to do more drugs and die. Like that didn't happen. And that wasn't really my experience. So like, I was a pretty smart kid, and it was like a trial and error thing. Like, as long as I keep up these external appearances and, I don't have to worry about what, this isn't really impacting my life. So why would I stop? Getting alcohol a lot was a little harder to get away with. Like my parents didn't want me drinking as a kid, and didn't really explain why. It was just like, you're not of age and you're not allowed to do it. And like that was kind of it. That was just the way it was. So it was easier for me to get, cannabis as a 15-year-old than it was for me to get alcohol. And, I would start doing that more and more frequently. And it was that other thing where it's like, I didn't start smoking weed and immediately go get heroin, and like have the risk of dying. So, there was that, like, the societal narrative didn't apply. So it's like, I'm a pretty smart kid. It's not really going too bad. So, I started doing, smoking pot every once in a while with friends, and it got more frequent. And, there's a stretch where it was like, I got real drunk at my cousin's wedding. I was 15. I threw up in the hotel room with my family the night of the wedding. So it was like, all right, you're grounded for a month. I kept my grades up that whole time. I like obeyed the consequences of my action. And then it was like, all right, there's like no talking about anything that went into the way of like why I drank or anything like that. And then like less than like 2 months later, my parents found some stuff I was using to smoke weed with. And it was another that like, you're grounded for 2 months now. So that's like, it's twice as bad as drinking underage. But like, I was able to like fulfill all the consequences of my actions. And then, it was just really like, there was just no talking about, it was just like, do your crime, do your time if you do the crime. And like, that was it. Then we could just like kind of like not talk about it, or just like kind of put it under the rug and not address the elephant in the room that like, a lot of my actions and like behaviors are like impacting like stressful, situations on the rest of the family. I'm the oldest of four. So, I was the kid who was always setting a terrible example, but like on paper, I was like the good kid who was like an honor student, who participated in sports, who was like, involved in the church that I grew up going to, and was like an altar server and stuff like that. So like, as long as those external things were good, like I was just, continually going back to, behaviors without like, any type of repercussions for, my actions. And, midway through my sophomore year, I tore my rotator cuff, got prescribed opioids. And that was like my first time getting those. I didn't like love them, but like I knew they got me messed up, and like people said like, oh, can I get some? So I gave them some. They got caught with those sums, so I got expelled from high school. And like meanwhile, I'm the good kid. Parents are like, oh, you can't hang out with me anymore. And it was, I don't know, like, thinking back to it, it was like, I went to high school. I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't have like a lot of that, I went to the high school that was closest to my house, not the high school that all my friends went to. So I was kind of resentful of my parents for that, looking back on it. But, it was just kind of one of those things where, we just didn't have, like, I just didn't have the ability to communicate like, hey, I'm really uncomfortable in like the way I feel. And like, doing things for other people makes me feel good. Doing substances makes me feel good. It was more of just like my parents asking me over and over again, why do you keep doing this? And me saying, I don't know, because I didn't know, because I didn't have the emotional vocabulary to really like talk about that. And we didn't have like, a community that we grew up in that was really talking about, why, we're going, like why we do the things we do, and like how to have like, I'm sad today and I don't know why. And like, it was just like, well, don't be sad, is like kind of how I perceived it. So, but like all the while, like, because I was the quote unquote good kid, I had people that like came to support me, to help bail me out. And like, I didn't get like any legal trouble for substances. And when I got expelled from school, I was able to like get into the school that I wanted to go to with all my friends. So like my behavior improved. And also I knew like I was on a really tight leash. So like if I screwed up again, that there would be some pretty severe consequences. Like I was, not far enough gone that I couldn't recognize that. But, all the while, like it's still smoking weed before school. It's still smoking weed after school, picking up smoking cigarettes because it was the cool thing to do, I guess, then. Now everybody's just vaping and stuff. But, it was like, I like didn't know how to communicate and like, find friends on like a deep emotional level. So I just like molded my personality to the people around me. So that like I could have this perception that like everything's good and I have a good group of friends and things like that. So, I was able to, still maintain that like National Honor Society role, like, got into a really good school. And then it was like, all right, I'm moving out and like move into the city with some friends, or no, move into the city for school. Substance use, like it's pretty typical, like alcohol use, where it like just started on the weekends. I had some events where I had a couple close friends of mine die within like a relatively short period of time of each other. And, one of them actually had like a cardiac episode at my house and I had to give him CPR. I didn't make it. And it was one of those things where like, I didn't have any tools to like really figure out like how to process the emotions that I was going through. And so it was like, I know alcohol would numb out all the feelings. So like, that's when my drinking really progressed. I was 19 years old, not having the capability of like figuring out how to like deal with, trauma, how to deal with, just anything, like how to deal with school. So, there was a cycle where I would start drinking. I would like kind of crash and burn, like, be close to failing out. I would run to my mom and dad for help. I was very fortunate that my parents, like even, they never really gave up on me. They never, always had like tried to come to bat for me the best that I could in the moment. And, I would run to mom and dad. They would bail me out. I would like do the actions that would require me to like take another step to like either get back in school or, whether that was like going to therapy. But like none of this ever looked at like, I thought it was like I was anxious, I was depressed, I had PTSD from some events. Never once was it like, hey, why don't we look at like your drinking? And like, also I was just never really honest with anybody about how much I was consuming, what substances I was doing. It was like, I was a college kid. So like, I was like, all right, I need to do well in school. So I need to stay up for a bunch of days. So like Adderall got thrown into the mix there. And like, I could always justify what I was using based on the circumstances of like that current moment. It's like, all right, I had a long week of exams. I need to drink to let off some steam. I have a bunch of exams. I need to take a bunch of Adderall. I need to come down, so I need to smoke weed so I'm not hungover the next day. And it was just like this cycle where the amount I was drinking was progressing, the amount I was using substances was progressing to like where I was using stuff daily, and didn't really recognize it was a problem. It wasn't until like 4 medical leaves of absences later, failing out of a profession that I thought I wanted to do it for the rest of my life, that I was like all of the external like things didn't look as good as they had once looked. I didn't have that identity as like, oh, I'm going to be a medical professional, or, I'm still in like National Honor Society. I'm still involved in like community organizations that try to like better people's lives around me. It was just like, I can't communicate effectively with my family. I'm ruining every friendship that I have. Close to getting evicted from apartments just because like I don't sign my loan forms. But I was very fortunate that like people saw that like there were circumstances in my life that I really couldn't control that eventually led me to like seeking kind of being forced into recovery. It was like I needed that identity of like, all right, I'm a good student, I just need to get out of school with a degree. It was my 7th year of my undergrad. I was going into my 7th year of my undergrad, and they were like, if you want to come back, you need to get a drug and alcohol evaluation. And I was really fortunate that like I'd recognized that like I needed to cut back on drinking. I knew I needed to like stop things. Like there was a stretch where, my parents were catching me. I was drinking and driving a lot. I was living at home, so they knew I was drinking and driving a lot. And it was eventually like, if you do this one more time, like you're not allowed to live here anymore. And that forced me to like stop drinking for a while. And then I was like, all right, I got to get this evaluation. And, so I started drinking again, and I wasn't drinking and driving then though. So I could justify that little run that I had there. But it was the first time that I was like really honest and like knew that like I had to be completely abstinent from drugs and alcohol if I wanted to go back to school and recreate this like false persona of, like what a quote unquote like good member of society looks like without having what that really, any idea what that really meant. So I was just fortunate that like having that for me, that forced abstinence, or that like perceived forced abstinence, and that like willingness to like, all right, I can do this for a year. Once I graduate, I'll like get back at it and stuff. And I had, some really good therapists I started working with, started doing some family therapy with my parents. Like I was 24, I was living at home, and like, that was like the last thing I really wanted to be doing. So like, the family therapy was kind of something to like, I was just always so tense at my house. Like, I was that terrible example, like, my siblings were all, doing great things. Like my sister had graduated grad school by the time, my sister is like 6 years younger than me, had already graduated grad school by the time like I had finished my undergrad degree. So it was just like, or had been accepted to grad school by the time then. And I was just like, I just never was like that good example of what I wasn't a good example of what like a big brother should be for their siblings. And, I knew I needed to improve those relationships. So like the family therapy really helped. I started doing like drug and alcohol therapy, and like, I went through this, and then, started getting involved in mutual aid and 12-step groups. And, from there, I was finally able to like find that community that I could really relate to and could really like, grow and strive. And like, I could really grow and challenge myself with on an emotional level that I didn't think I was capable of. I was really fortunate that like I got involved with a group of people who were really serious about their sobriety and their recovery, and all came from like similar backgrounds. Like, most of my friends were all like a non-traditional treatment path. They didn't go to an inpatient drug and alcohol program and a recovery house and things like that. Like a lot of them were, still living at home with mom and dad, and, we're just trying to figure things out just like we were. So, it was like eventually I got to the point where after doing enough work, with a therapist and like with my family, that like I recognized like, yeah, this is like a problem that's like, I don't know, it's going to be, if I consume substances, there's going to be consequences. I don't have an off switch once I consume that, first substance of any kind. I don't know what's going to happen when I have a beer. There were so many nights where I said, I'm going to go out, I'm going to have 2 drinks with my friends. And then it's like, I start drinking on Saturday, and then it's like come to on Tuesday. And like, that's just like, not where I saw my life going at 24 years old or 23 years old. Like, I was supposed to be like having the fun college experience and like joined a fraternity and like, had all these things that, like, I'm supposed to do this, but like, I can't do that. That's just not the way my brain is wired. There is like substance use and mental health issues that run in my family. And, it's really challenging to like figure out, those things that like, it's hard to realize those things. It's like, I'm just not wired like, a small percentage of I'm wired the same as a small percentage of the population. But like, I was able to graduate from school. I was able to start working a 9-to-5 job that like that had like benefits and paid time off and like all these things that I like never expected to happen. And, was able to eventually like, go back to school. And, I got really involved in the recovery community. And that like, that's just the kind of what continually like kept me going, was like that ability to try to help other people. Was able to like figure out different ways that improve my overall mental well-being on a day-to-day basis. And, that's kind of what I need. I need that supportive network of peers. I need that supportive relationship with my family and that, committed relationship with my family. I need to do things that improve my overall well-being. And that's like exercise. I got really into exercise. I've done a lot of crazy events. I ran a 50K, 33 miles for my 33rd birthday. I did a half Ironman last year. I did things that like, I don't know. I correlate a lot of like the crazy dumb exercise things I've done to like things that go along with my recovery. It's like, I don't know what the result's going to be, but like if I put in the work to like, train effectively, and I will see results and see successes that I never once imagined I could do. When I entered recovery, I was, about 35 pounds heavier than I am now. And just like, I hadn't exercised in like almost a decade, and probably like 7 or 8 years. I was, just like nine, like, I was a pack-a-day smoker and, all these things that just like, I never expected to like continue to like be able to do these things. And, I don't know, like all these things that I never expected to happen because I stopped using substances eventually came true. I got that supportive network of friends. I met the woman that I eventually married. We just had our first kid 8 months ago. And, that like life of, all those like, desperate and moments of severe despair ultimately led me to like a life that is really worth living, and a life that I never could have imagined for myself if I had just continued, if I had lived in that like ideal existence of like, I can drink like a quote unquote normal person, or like, somebody who doesn't have a history of substance use disorder. I got to do like way more things and, be connected to people on such a deep and emotional level. And like, this is like, being asked to speak for this really has me thinking of, it's like, my wife and I met in recovery and are both in recovery. So it's like, how are we going to have these conversations with my daughter, when she starts coming of age? And, it's going to be, try to find that emotional vocabulary so that like, she knows that like, she knows the reality of the situation is like, hey, you don't get good shot at genetics. Like if you start using substances before you're of age and things like that, and it's like, you hope for the best. And, it's definitely like has me thinking of like how to effectively communicate like those feelings and emotions, and creating a vocabulary in a place that has that safe dialogue. And, I'm just grateful for the life that my recovery has given me. And, I wouldn't have it any other way. So I think that's really all I needed to share tonight. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was great. There's so much I think that you will be equipped with as a parent that certainly I wasn't, and so many others. And I just think about all these prevention programs that you're part of now, and all the things I wish I could have implemented back in the day. Just like the example that Caroline Finkel is one of our presenters, and she talks about that modeling kind of thing. And one of the things we say is like to say to your child, I am so stressed out. I've been on my computer all day. I'm sick of looking at screens. I'm going to go take a walk. Do you want to come with me? Like, what a really great modeling for to do, for our kids, just to say, like, this is what I do to de-stress. This is what I do to take care of my mental health. And to put those words on it, mental health, I mean, it shouldn't be taboo. It should be something that we feel comfortable talking about. So I think you guys are in good shape. Oh, so Mr. Seiler, can you unmute and tell us a little bit about your school district and some of the resources that are available to families?
Absolutely. And I just want to start off by thanking you, Kim, for sharing this information with us and with our families, with our community. It's really something that we're really proud to be able to offer on behalf of the Pottsgrove School District, and a lot of really great takeaways for us this evening. Bob, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story and experiences as well. It's really resonated with me. It was really impactful. So aside from being an elementary school principal, I'm a father myself. I have a fifth grade daughter. I have a second grade son. So these conversations are really timely for me and meaningful and impactful. And I'm just really grateful to have an opportunity to network and connect with you both this evening. Speaking on behalf of the school side, we really want to advocate for a lot of what both Kim and Bob spoke to earlier. We've been utilizing a program we call Second Step. It's a social emotional learning program for a number of years through a partnership that we have with Creative Health Services. They had prior to this year administered that program for us through some grants. This year we were able to deliver that curriculum ourselves from our own classroom teachers, which has been really powerful and impactful for us across our building cultures at all three elementary schools. And it really speaks to a lot of what I heard both Bob and Kim say throughout this evening in terms of developing that emotional vocabulary for students, being able to identify those feelings and implement strategies to regulate and negotiate. Get yourself to a good mental health space, which again has been really impactful for us this year. A little bit further, that's given us an opportunity to explore some additional offerings that we're excited to look at going forward, particularly at the K2 level. We're exploring an opportunity to develop that partnership with Creative Health Services further through a program, a grant covered opportunity program for Creative Health to deliver a program for us at the K2 level titled Too Good for Drugs, which will expand upon that a little bit further. It'll talk, and I think I heard you mention this, Kim, earlier about safe use of medicines and how to navigate that conversation as students would get a little bit older and move through our elementary program at more of the 3 through 5 level. Some of those conversations include the effects of tobacco, the effects of alcohol, effects of marijuana that takes place as students get a little bit older throughout and move forward throughout our elementary program. And we are also really proud of our student assistance program that we offer at our elementary school. It's a great way for us to support students, to support families, to network with community resources, we've really had a lot of powerful takeaways for a number of our students and a number of our families through that partnership. So I would just continue, for parents who are interested in more information and how they can expand upon the topics that we talked about here today, I would encourage you to reach out to your child's teacher, reach out to your building principal, your school counselor. We have a great team in the Pottsgrove School District who are just so dedicated and so focused on doing everything that we can to support the whole child. Not just the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. We are very committed to our students as people and as lifelong learners. So we're really proud of the community that we have, really proud of the programs we have, and events like this are a great chance for us to come together and showcase that. So thank you again, Bob and Kim, and for allowing me to be a part of this session this evening.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm curious to know if anybody who's with us this evening has any questions. I'd love to hear from you. I think that what comes up a lot for parents when they hear a program like this for K-5 parents. Like, why are we talking about drugs and alcohol, right? It's not a thing. Well, I think that when we hear those fifth graders' questions, for one thing, that tells us that it's something that they're hearing things about, they're hearing some misinformation. So just talking about it isn't going to promote the use of it. It's not like, bringing up the subject is going to make them curious enough to start drinking or something. It's like, no, we're going to talk honestly and have that fertile ground for conversation. And I think there are so many opportunities. There aren't too many of us who don't know someone, whether it's a family member, whether it's a neighbor or a colleague or a friend, who has been impacted by addiction. And if we know about it, there's a good chance our kids are hearing something about it. There might be somebody down the street who's had an ambulance at their house a couple of times for their 24-year-old son who's at home, something like that. And so this stuff comes up. And if we use negative language or anything that sounds judgmental, it really can create some barricades to those conversations. So we want to label it and say, this is somebody who's clearly struggling. I sure hope that they get the help that they need. I hope they feel supported and loved. Even when there are celebrities who have a fall from grace, and that makes unseemly headlines and things like that. That's an opportunity also to not use those train wreck kind of colloquialisms around that and say, gee, I really hope that person gets some support and some help because they're clearly struggling. It's like anything that we do, if we're overeating or if we're, again, using self-harm or some way to self-soothe. These are things that we feel when we're doing it are protecting us and making us feel better. It's not necessarily, we think as the parent, at least I did, I felt like I failed. When I realized my son was getting high, I really felt like I failed as a parent. What did I miss? How was I not here for him? And I think that changed the intention of a lot of my conversations. I just wanted to change the story. No, we got to go this way. You're not going to do this anymore. Right. And that wasn't the case. He was already deeply into it by the time we knew anything. And I think I panicked, and I wish instead that I had, how they say, put the oxygen mask on yourself first on a plane. We need to do that in life too, and realize that there are a lot of resources. You mentioned some, Steve, that are at your school. That is, the school wants to be your advocate. They do not want to be your child's punisher. They want to be their advocate and your advocate and help you. And I really advocate for transparency for the family members, because I know when my kids, especially by the time they were in high school, I wanted the school to I wanted them to love them K-12 the whole way through and think they were like the greatest kid on earth and write them a great letter of recommendation and maybe give them an award or two. I didn't want to tell them, hey, I think that he might be smoking some weed. I didn't want to do that, but I wish that I knew more about his use, that I could have sought help there. I realize now how many resources are available. I don't think many parents know what SAP is. That stands for SAP, is Student Assistance Program, which is mandated in every public school in the state of Pennsylvania to have, at least at the high school level. So there are resources in your buildings, and also they can refer you to outside behavioral health providers as well, if that's called for. So please don't be afraid to acknowledge any disconcerting behaviors, any experimentation that's going on. And it's really never too early to at least have this be something that kids feel comfortable bringing up or talking about. It doesn't have to be on the level of, and we have some guides on that follow-up page as well for how to talk to kids at different ages. One of them that I'm remembering too is what to say, how to talk to your kids if they ask you if you use drugs. And that's something that people ask us a lot about, is I'm not sure what I should tell. And basically what this handout is expressing is it's a really good idea to be honest. You don't have to get into the details like, oh, this one time, you don't want to be telling stories about it to a young child, but to say, I did some experimenting, and if you regret it, talk about your regret. If you learned something from it, share that. But what the takeaway from this is it's best to be honest about it. because again, you want to model that for your child. You don't have shame about it, but you have maybe some insights that you can share. So there's so much that we can do when they're really young. And Bob, you talked about your little baby girl, and I just wonder, I think I mentioned this to you earlier, that another person who shared their recovery story was asked by some parents, what would you tell your younger self? So when you were describing those first times that you were given alcohol to try and things like that, if you could have been there as you, Bob, the grown-up, talking to young Bob, what would you have said to him, do you think?
Yeah, I think like the one thing that I would definitely say is like, it'll all be okay in the long run. Cause like, it doesn't seem like that in the moment. But other than that, I think it would be like, it's okay to get vulnerable and let other people know that you're uncomfortable. I didn't have that I didn't have that ability as an adolescent, that like, I was always felt uncomfortable. I was just that like anxious, just like wanted everything. Like I was I just needed everything to look good on paper. And then there's other people out there that can support you through this journey, like through that side of things that could have, maybe prevented it from, developing into a full blown substance use disorder, as opposed to just, a kid experimenting with substances. Yeah.
And how old were you? I mean, you may have said this, when your parents first became aware.
15.
Okay.
Yeah. It was from like 15 to like 17, it was, or 15 to 15 to 17, it was like, there was consequences. And then like, what I learned from that is like, as long as I can keep it under wraps enough, then like, there's nothing to worry about. So I hid a lot of like what I was doing, instead of, just what it's like kind of how I, got by and coped with reality, was to hide everything that I was feeling and going through.
I think that's one of the hardest pieces of this prevention stuff is how do you, finding that balance with wanting to be aware and have a discussion with our kids about it, but not driving them deeper underground. And I've talked to my son about this, like everybody always wants to know from people in recovery, like what's the magic sauce that will keep my child from having this happen to them? And I've yet to hear anyone come with like the perfect solution, because if we had that, we wouldn't have this problem, I guess. But, Daniel was like, there's nothing you guys did. It's not your fault. It was just something that happened to me that I loved, and you couldn't have stopped it. And we were, and his dad is a physician, and I was working from home. I was there. I was a very involved parent, and yet we both missed it for years. And the thing is, it helped him to feel better. He felt more social. He felt more comfortable in his skin. And it was working for him for a while until it became a problem. That's when it came to our attention. So by that time, he was pretty deeply into it, but he was so good it wasn't even he was good at hiding it. It was just, it felt right to him for a long time, and I think that we can really beat ourselves up for missing. I certainly did, for missing this, but I understand now that that for adults as well, we don't always realize that somebody we love as an adult is drinking alcoholically, because it's working for them in some respects. It's helping them with whatever anxieties they're having or something. But then, unfortunately, it's not a sustainable way to handle our stress. It's just not. It's and it's certainly not healthful. There are so many other things we can do, which we discussed earlier. But I guess, one of the things that I wish I had done with our son, well, I wish I didn't have such a cavalier attitude about certain things. Like, I didn't know anything about marijuana. I had tried it in college, never liked it. But I know that his dad and I both had a kind of a like, oh, it's not really a really big deal. It's not as bad. Some people think it's so awful, but it's not that bad for you. And I know now that especially the marijuana now is very, very difficult to manage, and it can be very problematic. But I think that my attitude might have paved the way for him to feel comfortable trying that. So certainly wish I had changed my attitude and had a different attitude about that. And I do think that a lot of our peers were serving their kids. We didn't serve our kids necessarily. I mean, we were around it, but it wasn't anyway. I just think that there was just a little too much of a lackadaisical attitude about substances with our kids that would have been helpful, to just to not be so, as I said, cavalier about it. I don't know. I don't see any questions. And I don't know, Steve, if you're able to speak to anything that is coming up, like that COVID has changed anything. And I'm sure at the age levels that you're with, you're not seeing substance use necessarily, but like anything that you're hearing just district wide about any trends that might be of concern.
So yeah, no, certainly I think, and I think it connects to a lot of the emotional regulation pieces that we've talked with, but we are seeing a lot of anxiety is a huge challenge for a number of our students, a number of families that we're navigating coming out of COVID. For our youngest learners, I'd probably say that's been the greatest uptick that we've noticed, that we're navigating social emotionally. Beyond that, I can speak to the number of students that qualify as homeless at this point has really been a significant impact, that we're working with a number of community agencies to support and try to get families connected with a lot of resources there. That coming out of the pandemic, that's at levels that I haven't seen in my career as an educator. But again, we are really proud of the student assistance program that we offer at the elementary level. We have a really strong partnership with Creative Health Services, who help us to navigate connecting families with therapists, counselors, resources. That's a challenge across, really across the county and the Commonwealth and the country right now, is just the availability of some of those resources, and the backlog to accessing a lot of those services is something that we are struggling with, and continuing to work together to at least provide access to what the opportunities are once they're able to staff some of those positions, or additional vacancies and opportunities come up. But just like you said, our goal is to partner with families and just know that that you're not navigating any of these challenges alone. That we are as invested in the academic, the social, emotional, and mental health well-beings of all of our students. The teachers, the staff, the faculty at all of our elementary schools are really second to none, and just so invested and so passionate about really helping students in whatever avenue they can, that we just want to continue and expand upon that partnership.
I think that's one of the silver linings of this horrible pandemic we've been experiencing the last couple of years, is that people do seem to be a little bit more comfortable talking about their mental health. You mentioned anxiety, stress and anxiety, and that is something we are hearing that across the board with our schools. I mean, from the administration through the staff, through the students and their families. It's a pretty universal theme, unfortunately. But maybe the good thing is that we're talking more about it. You're seeing more of it on social media. And I think that, speaking of social media and tech and all of that, we had a program with you guys previously called the Kids in the Tech Life Balance, and I think that we've focused a lot this evening on substance use, but, technology, smartphones, tablets, whatever, computers, it's a kind of a slippery slope. It's yet another, it's something that young people are having to use more and more. So finding ways to use that in moderation, is pretty challenging, to feel so dependent on it in some ways. And in the case of that first year of the pandemic, to be completely reliant on it for your education. and then to be able to step away from it, that's a tall order for a young person, to have to learn to manage that and moderate that use. And we don't know yet what the potential connections might be from the use of technology to substance use, to other kind of harmful behaviors. But it's certainly something to be wary of, and to be, monitoring as adults, our own use, and modeling that for our kids, but also asking our kids to think about their screen time, and I love these ideas of, having a family plan. We're going to challenge ourselves to cut down our screen time by such and such a percent, make it a math problem, because we all have the capacity to see what our screen time is now on our phones. So, finding ways to, as a family together, agree that we're going to be careful about this. And that might be a really good lesson for kids to learn about, moderating things like their use of technology, which could translate into other things that aren't quite as healthy, So I think we've learned a few things along the way in these last couple of years. And I think, again, time will tell, what will come of it with other kids. Substance use, especially with the older years. Vaping, that device, that vape pen, really did change a lot of things too. It made it a lot more accessible and easy to conceal. And just, if people aren't aware about vape pens, they typically have nicotine juice, like e-juice they call it, that has nicotine salts in it. Nicotine is extremely addictive. It's the same substance that's in a tobacco combustible cigarette, but it's a lot easier on your throat. It's a lot easier to hide, and it's very, very, very appealing to a young person. So if your son or daughter smells like mango and you're not sure what that's about, they might have tried somebody's vape pen. We know that a lot of kids are getting it from older siblings or friends of siblings and all that sort of thing. So just something else that we have to manage these days, unfortunately. Let's see. I still don't see any questions. I guess if no one has anything, we can wrap up. We'll give it another second or two if anyone has anything that you'd like to ask. Thank you, Bob. He just popped in some more information for everyone on our website. So please check that out. And this is recorded. It will be up on our YouTube channel. It will also be on that follow-up page that Bob shared with you. So, so thank you so much. Thank you, Steve, for having us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again, Kim. Thank you, Bob. And again, thank you to the families that were able to join us this evening. And if you're interested in continuing this conversation further, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to your child's teacher, your school counselor, your building principal at any time. We're here to help, and we're here to support.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.